Now we're going to talk a little bit about what I like to call dead money grabs. Now, you wouldn't be a complete player if you stuck to one set of rules without ever varying from them. That's just not how poker works. In tournament poker, what I like to call dead money grabs are slightly higher risk plays that also offer a much higher success rate. A dead money grab is one in which your sole goal is to win what's already in the middle with no intention of playing your hand post-flop. Since you have no intention of playing the hand post-flop, the value of your hand is basically unimportant. In fact, if you had a marginal to good hand, you might be better off not attempting a dead money grab at all and instead seeing the flop cheaply. There are several ways to pick up dead money in a no-limit hold'em game. Here are a few tricks to get you started. 1. Pound the limpers in position. There are several ways to do this, but when making this decision to rob the limpers, the most important limper to focus on is the first limper. Basically, the play works a little something like this. With blinds at 100, 200, and a 25 ante, the first player limps in under the gun. Then let's say 2 more players limp in after him, as does the player in the button. From the small blind, you look down at 9-3 offsuit. Now, if you read the first limper as playing a weak hand, this might be the perfect opportunity to take this pot down. With 13-25 now in the pot, a rather large raise will win you the pot a very high percentage of the time, provided that A, the big blind doesn't wake up with a hand, B, the first limper wasn't setting a trap, and C, none of the limpers are severely short stacked, or D, the table you are at is very loose and has been calling large bets with really weak hands. If you are going to try this play, you'll have to raise more than 1,000. A 1,000 raise with so much money already in the pot will invite opponents with hands like pocket sevens or eights to try and flop a set. A better amount would actually exceed 2,000. Let's say you decided on a 2,600 raise. What you are basically doing is laying 2-to-1 odds that everyone will fold before the flop. That's not a bad price at all, and at most tables, your win rate will be much higher than 66% with this play. Once you've made this play a couple times, however, it starts to lose its effectiveness as people will eventually catch on. That could hurt you, but it could also really help you if later you find a hand like aces or kings in a similar situation and no one believes you. Still, it's not a play you want to overuse. Also, it's extremely important to note that you shouldn't risk a high percentage of your chips on a play like this. If you invest too high a percentage of your chips, you may find yourself pot committed with an absolutely trashy hand. For example, let's say you had a total of 5,000 and tried a dead money grab by making it 2,600. If you were being trapped, or if anyone plays back at you, you'd be pot committed even with a hand as bad as 9-6. Never put yourself in a position where you are pot committed with a terrible hand. Here's a second approach to the dead money grab. It's called coming over the top. Just to keep your opponents honest and to let them know that every pot goes through you, sometimes you need to come over the top of them with a pre-flop re-raise. Similar to pounding the limpers, there are some things to consider before coming over the top with a re-raise. First, how many chips do you have? If you are short stacked or a pre-flop re-raise is too high of a percentage of your stack, let it go. When you are coming over the top of an opponent with a trash hand, you are the one that's guessing. You don't want to be guessing when your tournament is on the line. Second, how many chips does your opponent have? For example, imagine that your opponent has raised from late position to 600. Take a look over at his stack and see how many chips he has left. If he only has another 1,200 more, leave it alone unless you have a hand worth playing for 1,800. Generally speaking, if an opponent puts in over 25% of their chips on a raise, they'll call any re-raise after that. Third, how does your opponent perceive you? If you've already come over the top of the same guy a couple of times already, it's probably not a good idea to go to that well one more time unless you're sitting on a big hand. If he appears frustrated or you think he might be on to what you're doing, stay out of his way for a little while until he calms down or your table image is restored. Nobody, and I mean nobody, likes it when someone continually re-raises them before the flop. Eventually, some guys just snap. Fourth, how much do I need to raise? If you're going to make this play, you have to make sure that you don't price your opponent into the pot. Here is an extreme example. Player raises from late position to 600, and from the big blind, you re-raise him to 1,200 with queen deuce offsuit. That is a terrible play. Your opponent will call your raise with any 2 cards in that situation, so all you're effectively doing is making the pot bigger while playing rags out of position. Not good. Every opponent is built differently and will react to different size bets differently. It's your job to really pay attention and watch how your opponents react to getting re-raised. For example, Let's say that you saw player X raise to 300, and when another player re-raised into 900, he called quickly. When it was time to see his hand, you noticed that he called the raise with a rather weak hand, Queen 10. That one play should clue you into the fact that if you come over the top of player X, you need to raise more than that. If you wanted to steal his 300, you're probably going to have to risk somewhere around 1200 to 1600. If you have no read on what your opponent's tendencies are when re-raised, aside from it probably not being a good idea for you to come over the top of them, you should generally make a substantial re-raise, approximately 4 times larger than the player's initial raise. So, if a player makes it 500, if you want to steal the pot away from him, it's best to make it about 2500. By making a raise of that size, or more, you will win the pot a higher percentage of the time while having a clear picture as to the strength of your opponent's hand. If your opponent can call or even re-raise that bet, it's very likely that you are dealing with a real hand. In other words, it might be time to abort mission and cut your losses. There are many variations of a dead money grab, and they can be very useful plays, especially during the inevitable stretches during tournaments where you just can't seem to pick up a hand. You can't expect to win a big poker tournament by simply waiting for the best hands. You need to keep your focus up by constantly being aware of your table image and always looking to pick up pots before the flop that nobody seems to want.